Each morning was the same, and Jenny found a strange comfort in the rhythm. She walked the 3 blocks to Rosie's diner, her boots crunching softly against the gravel dusting the sidewalk. The neon sign buzzed as she unlocked the front door, the warm smell of coffee grounds and grease greeting her like an old friend. Before the first customer stepped through the door, she had already wiped down the counters, prepped the coffee machines, and flipped the open sign with a soft sigh. The regulars arrived like clockwork. Harold with his crossword and aching knees. Joyce, the retired schoolteacher who ordered her eggs over easy, but always forgot to ask for wheat toast. They greeted Jenny by name, never asking personal questions, and she returned their small talk with practiced ease and a patient smile that rarely touched her eyes. Upstairs, in her apartment, there were few reminders of another life. A cracked photo frame with a picture of her father in uniform, her mother's favorite recipe cards, yellowed and curling. Her aunt's letters, short, practical updates from Arizona where the warmth helped her arthritis, rested in a drawer Jenny hadn't opened in weeks. There were no weekend plans, no visits from friends, no holidays to mark. Jenny had mastered the art of being invisible. She moved like background music in the lives of others, steady and unnoticed. Her world was clean booths, warm plates, and the occasional kindness slipped in where no one would object. It had been that way for years. The town didn't change much, and neither did Jenny. The seasons came and went. The diner's front windows steamed up in winter and baked under the summer sun. Time ticked along with the clatter of plates and the shuffle of boots across tile, and Jenny remained. A quiet fixture behind the counter, pouring coffee and asking if anyone wanted cream, her loneliness as tightly tucked away as the order pad in her apron. She didn't expect her life to shift. Not here. Not in the place where nothing ever really changed. But change was already walking toward her in worn sneakers and a too-big backpack. The bell above the diner's door gave a soft jingle, just like it always did. But something about this entrance pulled Jenny's attention. It was just after 7, and the early light spilled across the cracked linoleum in gold stripes. A boy stepped inside, small and alone, with a backpack that seemed far too big for his narrow shoulders. He paused just inside the doorway, eyes scanning the space with a wariness that didn't belong on someone so young. Jenny offered her usual greeting, the one she gave every newcomer, but the boy didn't respond. Instead, he moved toward the corner booth, the one farthest from the windows and even farther from the counter where she stood. He slid into the seat slowly, cautiously, his eyes darting to the window, then the door, then back to the table in front of him. From his bag he pulled out a book, the cover faded and worn at the edges, and placed it carefully on the table. Jenny walked over with a menu, though she had a hunch it wouldn't be needed. "Morning," she said gently, laying the laminated page down. The boy didn't meet her eyes. "Can I get you something to drink?" He hesitated before answering. "Water, please," he said, voice just above a whisper. She nodded and returned with a tall glass and a paper straw. He gave the slightest nod in thanks, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching closely. Jenny was watching. Years in the diner had taught her to read people without them saying much, and this boy, who couldn't have been older than 10, was sending signals in silence. Not just hunger, though, that was there. It was something else. A need to disappear. A need not to be seen, even while sitting in plain sight. She left him alone, pretending not to notice how his eyes lingered on the plates being carried past. Eggs and toast, pancakes dripping with syrup, bacon curling at the edges. He didn't ask for anything more. Just sipped his water slowly and read with the kind of focus people use when they're trying not to think about something else. When he finally left, it was with the same silence he arrived in, leaving behind only the empty water glass and a trace of sadness that clung to the vinyl seat. Jenny stood behind the counter, wiping down a clean section for the third time. Something about him stayed with her, a quiet question with no answer yet. In a life where every morning looked like the last, this one was already different. He came back the next day, same time, 7:15 on the dot. Jenny noticed the way he moved, quiet and careful, like he was trying not to disturb the air. He slid into the same booth in the corner, laid his book down with a reverence she rarely saw in kids his age, and asked for a glass of water. Just water. Again. By the fourth day, Jenny didn't bring the menu anymore. She simply brought the water and a soft smile, placed them on the table without a word. The boy gave her that same faint nod, so slight you could miss it if you blinked. But Jenny saw it, and she felt the weight behind it. She started watching more closely. Not in a nosy way, at least not at first. But there was something about his stillness that drew her attention. He never played with his straw, never fidgeted with his book. He just read and watched, eyes flitting up occasionally as plates passed by. His gaze lingered on stacks of pancakes, golden and steaming, on sausages that sizzled, and eggs with yolks like warm suns. But he never asked. After the first week, Jenny knew his rhythm better than some of the regulars. He arrived precisely 45 minutes before school started, his backpack hinting at where he was headed once he left. He read quietly, eyes scanning pages with deliberate focus. At 7:55, he would close the book, tuck it neatly into his bag, whisper a thank you, and disappear through the door like a shadow at sunrise. He never ate, not once. Jenny tried not to let it get to her, but it did. Every time he watched a plate go by, her stomach clenched. There was hunger in his eyes, but not just the kind food solved. It was the kind you learned to carry, the kind that lived in the silence of empty kitchens and forgotten birthdays. No one else seemed to notice. The regulars chatted, read newspapers, stared at their phones. But Jenny watched. She saw the way his hands tightened around his cup when bacon passed his table. She noticed how he leaned slightly towards the scent of syrup or butter before pulling back like he'd caught himself wanting something he couldn't have. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer charity. She just watched, silently, as the boy came and went each morning like clockwork. And in that quiet watching, something began to shift inside her. Something old and familiar. Because once, long ago, she had been the kid sitting in the corner, too proud to ask, too tired to explain. On the 15th morning, Jenny did something she didn't plan, or maybe she did. In that quiet, unconscious way, the heart makes decisions before the mind catches up. The boy had arrived right on time, his usual booth waiting for him like a loyal friend. He placed his book down, asked for water, and folded his hands on the table like always. Jenny returned to the kitchen, but instead of just grabbing a glass, she picked up a plate of pancakes, 2 golden rounds stacked neatly, a small square of butter softening on top. She hesitated, just a second, then walked out like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Oh, sorry," she said when she reached his table, setting the plate down as if surprised. "The kitchen made an extra. I'll just leave it here instead of throwing it away." The boy looked up at her, suspicion and longing flickering across his face in the same breath. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but she cut him off with a gentle smile. "It's okay," she said softly, almost conspiratorially. "Sometimes the cook gets the orders mixed up. Better to eat it than waste it, right?" And then she walked away. She didn't turn to watch him, not immediately. She filled coffee mugs and took orders, her eyes fixed on tasks that didn't matter. But from the corner of her vision, she saw him stare at the plate. He didn't touch it for nearly a minute. Then, slowly, cautiously, he picked up the fork. When she returned to the booth 10 minutes later, the plate was clean, syrup smeared like a secret wiped away too late. The boy kept his head down, eyes locked on the book in front of him. His voice, when he spoke, was barely audible. "Thank you." 2 words, that was all. But Jenny felt something stir behind her ribs, something that made her throat tighten and her breath catch. The next morning she did it again. This time it was scrambled eggs and toast. No apology, no excuse. Just a plate placed gently in front of him, and the same unspoken understanding. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. And that was how it began. A quiet ritual built on silence and small kindnesses. No questions, no names, just a boy who showed up hungry and a woman who couldn't bear to let him stay that way. By the 3rd week, it was routine, though no one ever called it that out loud. At 7:15 each morning, the boy arrived, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the same book pressed against his chest, like it was the only thing he owned that couldn't be taken. He never lingered at the door anymore. He just walked in, nodded once at Jenny, and slid into his booth in the corner. Jenny would already be there, placing a plate in front of him without a word. Sometimes it was oatmeal with a pinch of brown sugar and a slice of banana. Other times, toast with jam or fluffy eggs that still steamed when she set them down. No 2 days were exactly the same, but every meal shared one thing. It was warm, it was enough, and it asked for nothing in return. The boy never asked for seconds. He never asked for anything, really. He'd eat slowly on some mornings, like he wanted to make the moment stretch. On others, he'd finish in hurried bites, his eyes darting to the clock, the door, the window, as if always preparing to leave. They didn't talk, not about anything beyond thank you, and sometimes a nod when she refilled his water. But the silence between them stopped feeling awkward. It became something else, something shared. A language of kindness spoken without needing sound. Other customers noticed, of course. Some asked questions with their eyes, a few with their mouths. But Jenny didn't offer explanations. Not to Harold at the counter, or Kathy behind the grill, or the businessmen who sneered over their coffee. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. The boy was hungry. That was enough for her. She paid for his meals quietly, tucking a few dollars from her tips into the register at the end of each shift. It wasn't much, but she adjusted, skipped lunch, postponed the dentist again, stretched her groceries a little longer. No one offered to help. No one needed to. Jenny had made her choice. And the boy, for his part, began to settle. His shoulders, once drawn tight like he was ready to run, started to loosen. His eyes met hers a little more often, even if only for a second or two. He never smiled, not fully, but the tight line of his mouth softened when she brought him his plate. Each morning, they rebuilt the same quiet world, just the two of them, in a corner booth of a tired little diner that most people passed by without a glance. But in that booth, something steady was being shaped. A ritual, a comfort, a lifeline neither of them would ever name, but both of them felt. It didn't take long for people to notice. Not the boy. He was too quiet, too careful to draw attention. But Jenny's part in it. The way she always seemed to have an extra plate ready just before 7:15. The way she lingered a little longer at the corner booth. The way her tip jar felt lighter at the end of every shift, though no one ever saw her spend a dime. "Who's the kid?" Harold asked one morning, squinting at the boy over his reading glasses. "Don't think I've ever seen his parents." Jenny just shrugged. "He's hungry," she said, wiping the counter like that was answer enough. Kathy, who ran the grill with the authority of a ship captain, caught Jenny in the back after the boy left. She leaned against the freezer, arms folded over her apron, one brow raised. "You feeding strays now?" Jenny didn't flinch. "He's just a kid." "Yeah, well, kids got parents, Or should, anyway. Kathy wasn't harsh, just practical. She'd seen good intentions get people burned before, and she carried that knowledge in the tight set of her jaw. You start giving handouts, they keep coming back. Next thing you know, you're the soup kitchen. Jenny met her eyes. That's fine. I used to be that hungry too. It was the first time she'd said anything personal in the 3 years she'd worked at Rosie's. Kathy didn't reply, just stared for a second longer, then went back to the grill without another word. Some of the customers were less subtle. One man in a suit, someone who always ordered without looking at the menu, glanced toward the corner booth and muttered, "Playing charity worker on company time, huh?" Another regular, older and loud, declared to no one in particular, "In my day, you earned your meals. No one gave you food just 'cause you looked sad." Jenny heard them. She just didn't respond. Let them talk. Let them judge. The boy never asked for their kindness, and neither did she. Mark, the manager, began to notice too. His eyes lingered on the receipts, the unpaid meals, the looks between Jenny and the kid. He didn't say anything yet, but she could feel his growing unease in the way he watched her from the office window, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. Still, each morning, Jenny showed up with a plate and a quiet determination. She didn't need applause or approval. She wasn't looking for praise. She just didn't want that booth to sit empty. Not if there was still one boy in the world who needed a place to feel full, even if only for 40 minutes a day. It was a Tuesday morning when Kathy pulled Jenny aside, just after the breakfast rush had thinned and the dishes were stacked in quiet towers by the sink. The boy had already come and gone. Oatmeal today, with a little cinnamon. He'd eaten faster than usual, barely looking up from his bowl. Kathy waited until the kitchen was empty, her arms crossed, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. Her tone was quieter than usual, less sharp, but edged with something else. Concern, maybe, or tired wisdom. "You're getting too close," she said. Jenny didn't pretend to misunderstand. She leaned against the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's a kid, a hungry one." "I know," Kathy replied. "And I know your heart's in the right place. But hearts don't pay rent, and they don't stop people from vanishing." Jenny said nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence could say more than argument ever would. Kathy sighed, running a hand through her short-cropped hair. "I've seen this before. You take in a stray, feed him, care about him, and then one day they don't show up. No goodbye, no thank you, just gone. And you're left with an empty booth and questions you'll never get answers to." Jenny looked down at the floor, scuffed tiles worn by years of feet passing through. "Maybe," she said softly. "But he shows up now, and right now, he needs it." Kathy didn't disagree, but she didn't nod either. "You're setting yourself up, Jen," she said. "People don't stay just because you're kind to them." "I'm not trying to make him stay," Jenny answered. "I'm just trying to make sure he's not hungry." That was the truth of it. She wasn't looking for loyalty, or repayment, or even a name. She wasn't building a relationship. She was setting down a plate of food each morning and asking for nothing in return. Because sometimes that was the only thing you could do. And sometimes it was enough. But even as she said it, Jenny felt Kathy's warning settle into her bones. Not as a reason to stop, but as something to prepare for. Because the truth was, she had gotten attached. She had started looking for his shadow through the front window each morning, feeling a ripple of anxiety when 7:15 came and went without him. And she knew, deep down, that Kathy was right about one thing. One day, he might not come back. And when that happened, kindness wouldn't be enough to keep the booth from feeling painfully empty. It happened on a morning colder than most, the kind that crept under jackets and left breath hanging in the air like ghosts. The diner's windows fogged up fast, and Jenny had to wipe them down twice before 7 o'clock. She made the boy oatmeal that day, thick with brown sugar and a few raisins from the bottom of the pantry jar. He sat in his usual spot, hands cupped around the warm bowl like it was more than breakfast, like it was a shield. Harold had just finished grumbling about the price of gas when he nodded toward the corner booth. "Still feeding the ghost?" he asked, not cruelly, just with that offhand curiosity people used when something didn't quite fit their understanding of the world. Jenny didn't answer. A few minutes later, as she leaned against the counter watching the boy scrape the last bit from the bowl, Kathy came to refill the napkin holders beside her. She didn't say anything at first, just worked quietly, her movements practiced and precise. Then, after a long pause, she said, "You ever wonder why this hits you so hard?" Jenny didn't look at her. Her voice came low, like a truth slipping out before she could catch it. "I was 10 when my dad died. He was military, deployed overseas. My mom made it 2 years after that before she got sick. Aunt June took me in, but it was never easy. We had nights where dinner was a slice of bread and tap water dressed up as soup." Kathy glanced over, the napkins forgotten in her hand. "I remember what it's like," Jenny continued, eyes still on the boy. "Going to school with an empty stomach, trying to pretend you weren't hungry, watching other kids unwrap sandwiches like they didn't even notice they had them, and praying someone would just see you." The words hung in the space between them, soft but heavy. "I don't know his story," Jenny added, "but I know that look in his eyes. I've seen it in the mirror." Kathy didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded, just once. Not approval, not agreement, just understanding. The kind that only comes when someone recognizes a piece of themselves in someone else's story. The boy rose from his seat, as he always did, tucking the book carefully back into his bag. As he passed Jenny on his way to the door, he looked up, not a full smile, but something close, a flicker of warmth. She offered him a quiet, "Have a good day, sweetheart." He nodded. And for the first time as he stepped outside into the cold, Jenny noticed his shoulders weren't quite so tense. Maybe he didn't feel so invisible anymore. Maybe he knew, without either of them saying it, that someone understood. Because once, long ago, she'd been just like him. And maybe now he wasn't alone. Not entirely. It wasn't dramatic. There was no grand moment where the boy suddenly opened up or smiled wide or offered his name like a gift. But Jenny noticed the changes, small, almost invisible to anyone else. The kind of shifts you only catch when you've been paying attention long enough. It started with eye contact, just a flicker, a second longer than before. Where he used to keep his gaze fixed on the table or the worn pages of his book, now his eyes met hers as she set down the plate. Still guarded, still quiet, but no longer hiding entirely. One morning, as she refilled his water, he pushed his glass slightly toward her, barely an inch, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a quiet trust. He no longer waited until she walked away to take the first bite. Instead, he picked up his fork as soon as the plate touched the table, like he trusted the food would stay, like he knew it was his to eat. Sometimes after he finished, he would sit for a few extra minutes, pretending to read but glancing at the front counter like he wasn't quite ready to leave. Jenny didn't press. She never asked questions, never tried to fill the silence between them with anything more than a smile or the occasional, "Good morning, sweetheart." But every day, she noticed his shoulders relaxed a little more, the tension that once wrapped him tight beginning to loosen. One morning, he reached for the syrup himself. Another day, he folded his napkin neatly after finishing his eggs and placed it beside the empty plate. And then there was the time she slipped an extra muffin onto his plate. He looked at it, then at her, and said, "I like the blueberry ones better," before lowering his eyes again. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken to her. Jenny just smiled and made a mental note to keep the blueberry batch warm. It wasn't friendship, not in the traditional sense. But there was a thread between them now, fragile but real. Woven out of pancakes and patience, quiet glances and wordless understanding. It was the kind of bond that didn't need defining to be felt. And Jenny, who had long since grown used to being alone in her own quiet way, felt something she hadn't felt in years. Seen. Needed, even, if only for 30 minutes each morning in a corner booth that now felt just a little less lonely. The frost was thick that morning, curling over the diner's windows like delicate white veins. Jenny arrived early, as always, her breath puffing in soft clouds as she unlocked the door. Inside, the warmth from the kitchen heaters chased away the cold, but a different kind of chill settled in her chest. By 7:10, she had his usual plate ready, 2 pancakes still steaming, with a little extra butter because she remembered he liked it that way. She set the plate near the counter, letting it rest a minute before she would carry it to his booth, as she did every day. At 7:15, the bell above the door stayed silent. She glanced up from the register, expecting to see him tugging his backpack through the doorway, shaking off the cold like he always did. But there was nothing, just the empty street outside and the faint whir of the heater overhead. By 7:20, her eyes flicked to the door more often than to the table she was serving. By 7:30, the pancakes had cooled. Harold mumbled something about the weather as he sipped his coffee, and Kathy slid an omelet onto the pass-through with her usual efficiency. But for Jenny, the morning felt off-kilter, like a song missing its first note. At 7:40, she reheated the plate, just in case. At 7:55, she placed it at the corner booth anyway, arranging the silverware and napkin as if the boy might still walk in, late but hungry, offering that tiny nod in thanks. But he didn't come. She tried to keep her hands busy, wiping down menus, refilling syrup dispensers. But her gaze kept drifting back to that booth. Empty. Still. Wrong. Mark noticed her pacing near the counter. "Everything okay?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just a slow morning." But her voice lacked conviction, and she knew he heard it too. As the hours passed, the pancakes grew cold again. Jenny cleared the plate just before lunch, slower than usual, as if touching it might bring answers. She didn't throw the food out. Instead, she wrapped it in foil, set it in the back fridge, and labeled it with the date, something she hadn't done for anyone else's leftovers in years. That night, alone in her apartment, she sat by the window, watching the street below. The same one he used to walk down each morning, small and silent beneath the streetlights. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he missed the bus. Maybe tomorrow. But as she turned off the light, the empty booth echoed in her mind louder than any words. It had only been a few hours, but Jenny missed him already. By the 3rd day, the routine felt broken beyond repair. Jenny still set the plate out each morning, pancakes, then eggs, then toast with jam. But it sat untouched in the corner booth, like a ghost of something that once mattered. The food cooled too quickly, and so did her hope. Customers noticed. They always did, even if they pretended otherwise. "Your little shadow not coming around anymore?" Harold asked, not unkindly, just with that dry curiosity of someone who'd watched too many things fade to be surprised by another. Jenny gave a small shrug. Maybe he's sick. Harold didn't argue, just sipped his coffee and returned to his crossword. But not everyone stayed quiet. "Guess the free ride's over," someone muttered behind a newspaper. "He probably got what he wanted and moved on," said another, folding his napkin with smug certainty. Jenny heard every word. She didn't respond. Each morning she walked to work a little slower, the cold more noticeable now that there wasn't anything to warm her spirits. She still looked toward the street at 7:15, still hoped for that small figure with the oversized backpack to appear, book in hand, eyes downcast. But the sidewalk remained empty, day after day. By day 6, Kathy stopped pretending she wasn't worried. "You're still feeding the booth," she said, leaning against the counter as Jenny poured coffee. "You think he's coming back?" Jenny stared at the pancakes waiting under the heat lamp. "I don't know." Kathy didn't push. She just nodded, but there was something in her eyes. Pity, maybe. Or a warning that this kind of hope never ended well. Day 7 brought rain, and Jenny sat on her break watching it streak the diner windows. The booth stayed empty. The silence inside it louder than the clatter of plates or the hiss of the coffee machine. On day 9, someone took a photo. She saw it, a young woman snapping a picture of the untouched breakfast, laughing with a friend at the register. Jenny didn't ask why. She didn't have to. She already knew. And by the 10th day, the internet had turned cruel. A local Facebook group posted the image with a snide caption, "Rosie's Diner, feeding imaginary kids one plate at a time." The comments were worse. "Publicity stunt. Bet it's all for tips. Feeding strays just makes them dependent. She should mind her business and stick to waiting tables." Jenny didn't cry. Not then. But that night she sat alone in her apartment, holding a fork wrapped in a napkin she couldn't bring herself to throw away. She didn't know where he'd gone, didn't know if he'd come back. But she knew this. The booth felt colder now, and so did she. The post had already made its rounds by the time Jenny saw it. Someone had snapped a photo of the empty booth, her booth, the boys' booth, with a full plate of pancakes still untouched and cooling under the soft yellow diner lights. The caption dripped with sarcasm. "Rosie's Diner now serves invisible charity cases. Breakfast of champions for ghosts." It spread fast, shared by locals first, then by strangers who knew nothing of her or the boy or the silence between them that used to mean something. By the time Jenny stumbled across it, there were over 100 comments, most of them cruel. "She's either delusional or running some weird sympathy scam. Bet she's trying to guilt customers into bigger tips. Why not just open a soup kitchen if you're so eager to feed no one? Can't fix every sad story with pancakes, sweetheart." She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the comments section, her heart pounding in her ears. Each word felt like a pebble thrown against glass, tiny impacts building until something inside her cracked. She closed the app and tossed her phone on the couch like it had burned her. That night she sat in silence, the lights off, the TV muted. Her apartment felt smaller than usual, more hollow. The boy's absence had already carved out a quiet ache in her mornings, but now strangers were ridiculing the only thing that had felt meaningful in weeks. Her small act of kindness, simple, unspoken, and real, had been twisted into something laughable. And still, she couldn't make herself stop. She kept preparing the meals, quietly, privately. She wrapped the untouched food at the end of each shift and took it home. Not because she thought the boy might return. She was starting to fear he wouldn't. But because throwing it away felt like giving up. On him, on what they had built. The next morning, the diner buzzed with quiet tension. Some customers avoided eye contact. Others looked at her too long, as if expecting her to break under the weight of the rumors. Mark didn't say anything, but his usual half-hearted greetings were missing. Even Kathy was quieter than usual, flipping eggs in silence, glancing up at Jenny from time to time, like she wanted to say something and couldn't find the right words. Jenny didn't explain herself. She didn't defend her choices, or justify the food, or correct the strangers who thought kindness needed an audience to count. She just stood behind the counter, refilling coffee, clearing plates, and watching the door at 7:15, still hoping, even now, for a boy with tired eyes and a book in his hands to walk through it again. That night, after the cruel comments and the silence of another empty morning, Jenny found herself digging through the old wooden box beneath her bed. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the lid creaking open with a sound that made her pause, as if even the furniture knew this wasn't something she did often. Inside were the pieces of a life she kept tucked away, photographs curled at the edges, a broken watch that had belonged to her mother, and, beneath it all, the small leather-bound journal her father had carried during his final deployment. She hadn't opened it in years, not since the night she turned 17, and needed something, anything, to remind her that someone had once believed the world could be better. The pages were soft with age, the ink faded, but still legible in his careful, looping handwriting. She flipped through slowly, breathing in the scent of old paper and memory, until she reached the page she always returned to, the one marked by a dog-eared corner and a pressed wildflower from a childhood field she could no longer name. "Shared a half ration with a local boy today," it read. "Johnson said I was crazy, that the kid would probably rat us out or steal from us next time. Maybe he's right. But the look in his eyes when he ate, same as mine when Mom saved me the last piece of bread during the lean months back home. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf, but those who forget to share, they stay hungry their whole lives." Jenny stared at the words, her fingers resting lightly on the page. Her father had written that in the middle of a war zone, with dust in his boots and danger at his back. And still, he'd given what he had. Not because it was smart, not because it would be remembered, but because someone needed it. She closed the journal slowly, holding it in her lap like something fragile. He had always been her quiet compass, a man who believed in doing good even when no one was looking, especially when no one was looking. Jenny looked out the window, past the quiet town and the dark streetlights, and felt something settle inside her. Not peace, exactly, but clarity. She didn't need to know the boy's name or story to recognize hunger, and not just the kind that settled in a stomach. Sometimes the simplest act, a plate of pancakes, a glass of milk, was the only way to say, "I see you. You matter." Her father had understood that. And tonight, so did she. It was the 23rd morning since the boy had disappeared. Jenny still prepared the plate, habit now more than hope, and placed it gently at the corner booth like she had every day. It sat there, steaming faintly, untouched. A quiet ritual performed for a ghost. The diner buzzed with its usual low hum, silverware clinking, the coffee machine sputtering, someone complaining about the cold snap. Jenny was refilling Harold's mug when the silence fell. Sudden, heavy, like someone had turned the volume of the world down all at once. She looked up, instinctively. Outside, 4 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot in perfect formation. Sleek, identical, the kind with government plates and tinted windows that made everyone sit up a little straighter. They moved like they belonged somewhere more important than Main Street, Kansas. The doors opened in unison, and uniformed men stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably military. Their movements were efficient, practiced, the kind Jenny had seen in old footage of military briefings and honor guards. The town might have been sleepy, but these men were wide awake. Then the last door opened. From the lead SUV, a man stepped out, older, in full dress uniform, his chest heavy with ribbons and medals. His face was worn but steady, the kind of expression shaped by years of sun and sacrifice. He walked toward the diner, flanked by 2 younger officers. The bell above the door chimed, and every head turned. Mark emerged from the back, smoothing his apron and clearing his throat. Can I help you, gentlemen?" The older man removed his cap, eyes scanning the room until they settled on her. "I'm looking for a woman named Jenny," he said, voice calm but firm. Jenny blinked, froze in mid-step, still holding the coffee pot. "I'm Jenny," she said after a breath, setting it down with trembling hands. He stepped forward, pulled an envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket, and offered it to her. "My name is Colonel David Reeves, United States Army Special Forces Command." Jenny's heart pounded against her ribs. "I'm here because of a promise," the colonel said, his voice quiet now. "A promise made by one of my men, and a boy you've been feeding." The room held its breath. Jenny's voice cracked as she asked, "Is he okay?" "He's safe," Colonel Reeves said. "But he wasn't alone by accident, and he wasn't just any boy." The envelope trembled in her hands. What she had thought was a quiet act of kindness was about to unfold into something much bigger, something that had crossed state lines, battlefield memories, and the final words of a soldier who had trusted her, without ever meeting her, to care for his son. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Jenny turned it over in her hands, unsure whether to open it now or later, but Colonel Reeves didn't give her the chance to decide. His voice was gentle but carried the quiet authority of someone who had delivered more bad news than anyone ever should. "His name is Adam Thompson," he said. 10 years old, his father was Master Sergeant James Thompson, one of the finest soldiers I've ever known. Was. The past tense wrapped around Jenny's chest like wire. The colonel continued, his words deliberate. "James was deployed on a classified Special Forces mission overseas. Before he left, he made preparations in case something went wrong, left emergency funds, instructions, letters. But what none of us knew was that Adam's mother, she left shortly after James deployed, walked out, no goodbye, no warning, just gone." Jenny blinked, trying to hold herself still as the pieces started falling into place. "Adam stayed in their house alone," Colonel Reeves said. "Used the cash his father left to pay bills, ate what little food was left, got himself to school, never told anyone what happened. He was afraid if he did, they'd take him away, put him somewhere strange, away from home, away from the last place that reminded him of his dad." Jenny felt her throat tighten. She saw him again, those wary eyes, the way he angled himself toward the door, the too big backpack, and the silence that always felt deeper than shyness. He hadn't been just quiet. He'd been surviving. "For nearly 3 months," the colonel said, "he came here. Every morning. Adam told us later that he didn't know what made him pick this place, but something about the way you didn't ask questions made it feel safe." Jenny swallowed hard, her hands now clenched at her sides. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to," he said. "That's what made it matter." He reached into his coat again and pulled out a second piece of paper, this one handwritten and folded carefully. "Sergeant Thompson didn't survive the mission," he said. "He was killed 6 weeks ago. In his final letter to me, he said, 'If I don't come back, and my son mentions someone named Jenny from the diner, find her, thank her. She fed him. She looked out for him. She made sure he wasn't invisible.'" Jenny didn't realize she was crying until the words blurred. "He wrote," the colonel said, voice softening. "She didn't just feed my son. She gave him dignity. She gave me peace of mind in a place where peace didn't exist." The diner was silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Jenny stood there, broken open by the truth of it all. She had never known the boy's name, never asked. But Adam had been carrying more than hunger. He had been carrying the weight of war, of abandonment, of waiting for a father who wouldn't return. And somehow, without knowing, she had helped him hold it. Colonel Reeves unfolded the letter with the care of someone handling something sacred. The edges were worn, the paper slightly creased, as if it had been held and reread many times. He didn't hand it over immediately. Instead, he cleared his throat and looked Jenny in the eye. "This letter," he said, "was written during Sergeant Thompson's final deployment. He left instructions that, if he didn't make it home, we were to deliver it only if Adam mentioned you. He did. Many times." He finally extended the letter. Jenny took it with trembling hands, her eyes swimming before she'd even read the first word. The handwriting was rough but steady, James Thompson's voice living on in ink and memory. "To the woman who saw my son, I don't know your face. I don't know your name. But Adam does. He told me about you in the letters he sent. Said you never asked why he was alone, that you didn't look at him like he was broken, just brought him breakfast. Every morning, like it was the most normal thing in the world. In a time when everything in his life was falling apart, you gave him something steady, something kind. He never said much about the food, but he always mentioned how it made him feel safe, not judged, not pitied. You didn't just feed my son. You reminded him that people still care, even when the world forgets. You preserved the dignity I tried to teach him before I left. And for that, there are no words strong enough. If you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. But I want you to know, your quiet kindness reached farther than you can imagine. Across continents, into the heart of a father at war. You gave me peace where there was none. Thank you. James." Jenny's tears fell freely now, slipping down her cheeks as she clutched the letter like a lifeline. She could barely breathe past the weight of it. The grief, the gratitude, the depth of connection forged without a single conversation. The colonel took a step back. Then, in a gesture that stilled every soul in the diner, he stood at attention and gave her a formal military salute. A civilian, a waitress, a woman who served pancakes and water and never once asked a name. Behind him, the younger officers followed suit. Outside, through the wide windows, every soldier near the black SUVs mirrored the action. A silent line of respect for a woman who had no rank, no title, just heart. Jenny stood still, overwhelmed, the letter shaking in her hand. In all her life, she'd never expected to be saluted. But here she was, recognized not for heroics in battle, but for compassion in a booth beside the window, for warmth given freely, for kindness without condition. And in that moment, she understood. Sometimes, the simplest acts earn the deepest honor. The story spread through the diner like a ripple on still water, quiet at first, then unstoppable. No one had moved during the salute. Not Harold, not the businessmen who once rolled their eyes, not even Mark, who stood frozen in the doorway to his office, his hand still gripping a pen that had long stopped writing. When the soldiers lowered their hands, a hush lingered. Jenny stood in the center of it all, not knowing what to say, her fingers still curled around James Thompson's letter. She didn't need to speak. The truth had already spoken for her. Word traveled faster than gossip ever had in their little Kansas town. By lunchtime, the booth where Adam used to sit was already a sort of shrine. Customers asked to be seated there just to say they had. They left notes instead of napkins, tips with scribbled thanks. For Adam, one read. For his father. Another simply said, "For you, Jenny." That same Facebook group, the one that had mocked her with cruel jokes and cynicism, posted an apology. The post was long, sincere, and included a photo of the soldiers saluting her in the diner. The caption read, "Turns out, the waitress feeding the ghost boy was honoring the son of a hero." The comments were different this time. Words like respect, thank you, never forget. Hundreds of them. Thousands by the next morning. Strangers came by just to sit where Adam once did. Military families driving through detour to visit Rosie's diner, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had done what governments, systems, and communities so often failed to do: care, quietly, without question. Mark, once uneasy about Jenny's generosity, found himself fielding news inquiries and phone calls from veterans groups. He never said it aloud, but Jenny noticed the small American flag he pinned to the wall beside the corner booth, just above a newly polished plaque. Reserved for those who serve and those who wait. Even Kathy changed. She didn't apologize, not directly, but she started brewing the blueberry muffins earlier than usual. "Figured we should have them ready," she muttered one morning, eyes on the oven. "In case someone's kid likes them." The diner had been just a diner before, greasy spoons, small-town routines. But now it felt different. Reverent almost, not flashy, not loud, just aware. Jenny didn't bask in the attention. She still tied her apron the same way, still refilled coffee with that quiet grace. But something in her posture had shifted, a subtle lifting of the shoulders. Not pride exactly, more like peace. The kind that comes when you realize your smallest act may have meant the world to someone else. The town had seen her. And for the first time, they truly understood what they'd been witnessing every morning at 7:15. A quiet act of resistance against indifference. A simple plate of food that reverberated louder than any headline ever could. The envelope arrived a week later, addressed in blocky, careful handwriting to Miss Jenny Miller's at Rosie's Diner. There was no return address, just a small sticker of an eagle in the corner. Jenny recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. She took it to the back of the diner, away from the curious eyes and whispered admiration that still lingered in the booths. With her hands steady but her heart full of tremors, she unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear Miss Jenny, I didn't know your name until that day the soldiers came. But every morning, for all those weeks, you were the only person who made me feel like I wasn't invisible. You brought me pancakes. You smiled without asking anything. You didn't look at me like I was strange or broken. You just made me feel normal and safe. My grandma says I should say thank you more often. I think she's right. Thank you, Miss Jenny, for everything. For the food, yes, but more for not making me feel ashamed for needing it. My dad used to say, real heroes don't wear capes. He said sometimes they wear uniforms, but I think sometimes they wear aprons too. He told me that if something ever happened to him, someone good would find me. I think he meant you. I hope you don't mind that I think of you like that. Colorado is okay. I miss Dad. A lot. But my grandparents are kind. Grandpa is teaching me how to fish, and Grandma makes really good cookies, even though they're not as good as your pancakes." She laughed when I said that. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm waiting for something to fall apart. But then I remember the way you always looked at me, like I mattered even when I didn't say a word. That helps. More than I can explain. Thank you for not needing my story to be kind. Thank you for seeing me anyway. Your friend, Adam Thompson. P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It had a happy ending after all." Jenny didn't cry, not in the dramatic way she'd always seen in movies. Instead, the tears came slow, quiet, steady, just like Adam had been. She pressed the letter to her chest and sat in the stillness of the back room, surrounded by the soft hum of the freezer and the faint clatter of plates out front. This letter, written in a child's uneven scrawl, held more healing than 1,000 apologies from the world ever could. It was proof, not just that Adam was okay, but that what they'd shared had mattered, had lasted, had helped a boy through the hardest days of his life. And in return, his words stitched something inside Jenny back together, something she hadn't realized was still broken. The changes at Rosie's Diner didn't come with balloons or headlines. They came quietly, like the morning sun slipping through blinds, small, warm, and steady. It started with the corner booth. Mark polished the wood himself one evening after closing, muttering something about doing it right for once. The next morning, Jenny arrived to find a small brass plaque affixed to the table's edge. It read, "Reserved for those who serve, and the ones who wait." No one sat there without permission anymore, not out of fear, but respect. When veterans visited, they were offered the booth with a soft nod. When families came in with quiet grief behind their eyes, Jenny would sometimes guide them there, saying only, "This one's special." Then came the pancakes. They were the same recipe, fluffy, golden, touched with a hint of vanilla. But now they had a name on the menu. Adam's Plate. Just below it, no charge for military children. Ever. Jenny hadn't suggested it. Mark had printed the new menus himself. When she asked about it, he just shrugged and said, "Figured we owed him more than a breakfast." The wall behind the register slowly transformed. First came Adam's letter, framed in a simple wooden border, hung where only staff could see. But soon other things joined it. Unit patches left by visiting soldiers, challenge coins pressed into her hand with grateful nods, thank you notes from parents, from widows, from children who remembered what it was like to be seen when the world passed them by. Kathy added a small flag near the grill, taped above the spice rack. "So I don't forget who I'm cooking for," she said. Once a month, the diner started setting up a free pancake breakfast for military families. No flyers, no fanfare, just word of mouth and warm plates. They called it Quiet Mornings. And every time, Jenny stood near the corner booth, pouring coffee, watching the faces of kids who looked just like Adam had, cautious, quiet, and hungry for more than food. One afternoon, a young soldier left a small metal pin on the counter before leaving, a silver star, weathered and smooth. "For the woman who reminded us that kindness doesn't need orders," he said. Jenny didn't feel like a hero. She never had. But she watched as Rosie's became more than a place to eat. It became a place to feel safe, a place to feel remembered. And every time she flipped pancakes, she did it with a purpose, not just to feed someone, but to remind them in her own quiet way that they mattered, just like Adam had, just like she still did. The diner still had its skeptics, of course. Kindness made some people uneasy, especially when it revealed what they themselves hadn't done. At first, the regulars who had rolled their eyes at Jenny's stray were slow to change. Harold still grumbled about his coffee being lukewarm, and the suited man still tapped impatiently when his toast was late. But something had shifted, and it started to show in the smallest of ways. One morning, Harold paused at the register longer than usual. Jenny was wiping down the counter when he reached into his wallet, not for his usual exact change, but for a folded $20 bill. "Put this toward Adam's plate," he muttered, eyes not quite meeting hers. "Or whatever kid needs it next." Jenny blinked, surprised. "Thanks, Harold." He cleared his throat, waved a hand like it meant nothing, and went back to his crossword. Later that week, the businessman, the one who had once scoffed about charity, left behind a crisp note with his tip. "I didn't understand before. I do now. Thank you." And then there was Mrs. Lansing, who had once whispered too loudly about attention-seeking stunts and soft-hearted waitresses. She stopped by one evening, after the dinner rush, with a tin of cookies and a trembling smile. "My son's in the Coast Guard," she said. "I didn't tell many people, but I just wanted to say thank you for seeing someone when the rest of us didn't." Even Mark, who had once warned Jenny about free meals cutting into profits, now took time during every staff meeting to ask if anyone had ideas for giving back. He started keeping a quiet fund in the register for compassion meals, something he never advertised, but always replenished. He even placed a sign near the door, not flashy, just a small card with big meaning. No one leaves hungry. The whispers that had once circled Jenny like smoke were gone. In their place was something quieter, stronger. Respect, admiration, even regret sometimes, but the kind that led to action. Jenny didn't rub it in. She never brought up the early days, never reminded them of what they'd said. She just kept doing what she always had, serving pancakes, refilling mugs, and offering warmth where it was needed most. And the town remembered. Because sometimes it only takes one act of compassion to show people who they really are. And sometimes the hardest hearts aren't shattered by grand speeches, but softened, bit, by watching someone else love without needing a reason. The sign appeared one quiet Tuesday morning, before the sun had fully risen, while the diner was still half dark and Jenny was tying her apron behind the counter. She didn't notice it at first, just a flash of something new in the corner of her eye, a piece of paper taped to the inside of the front window. It wasn't printed in bold letters or decorated with stars, no fancy fonts, just plain black ink on white cardstock, centered and simple. Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry. She stared at it for a moment, unsure if she should believe it was real. Then she turned to see Mark standing nearby, holding his morning coffee like it might shield him from the conversation he knew was coming. "You put that up?" she asked. He nodded, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "Yeah." Jenny raised an eyebrow. "You?" Mark sighed. "Look, I know what I said before, about free meals and bad business, and I meant it at the time, but things change. I changed." There was something in his voice, quiet, almost embarrassed, a kind of vulnerability she hadn't heard from him in all the years she'd worked there. "I watched what you did," he said. "With Adam, and with everyone since. You didn't ask permission. You just saw a need and filled it. And it made me think, maybe we should be that kind of place." Jenny looked back at the sign. It wasn't loud or performative. It was a promise, a declaration, not of charity, but of dignity. "No approval needed," she said softly. "Just food." Mark gave a small nod. "We'll figure out the costs. I've got a few folks around town chipping in, anonymously. Veterans mostly, and people who were wrong." Jenny smiled, the kind that didn't just sit on her lips, but warmed her whole chest. The regulars noticed the sign by mid-morning. Some read it and looked away. Others paused, staring longer than they needed to, as if weighing what it meant, not just for others, but for themselves. And by the end of the day, 2 people had taken quiet advantage of the new policy. A teen with a worn hoodie who ordered just toast and was given a full breakfast instead. A mother with 2 kids who offered coins and was met with a smile and extra pancakes. No fanfare, no questions, just a booth, a plate, and a simple truth reflected in the glass. Here, you matter. Here, you eat. And as Jenny poured another round of coffee, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, not hope for change, but the certainty it had already begun. It started with the diner, but it didn't end there. In the weeks following the unveiling of the sign in Rosie's window, something began to shift in the town. Not all at once, no parades or headlines, but in those quiet, easily missed moments that said more than speeches ever could. At the grocery store, someone began leaving envelopes with a few bills tucked between cereal boxes and baby formula, labeled only with a sticky note. "If you need this, it's yours." No one knew who started it. No one tried to take credit. At the laundromat, an older man began taping quarters to the machines, along with slips of paper that read, "From someone who's been there." Jenny overheard a young woman whisper to her toddler, "That kind stranger just saved us dinner money." The hardware store started offering free repairs once a month. Fix It Fridays, they called it. No one was turned away. "Just pay it forward," the shop owner said with a shrug. Even the elementary school got involved. Teachers started a quiet lunch bin in the staff lounge. Extra sandwiches, granola bars, fruit cups. No tracking, no names. Just a little corner where hungry students could grab something without having to explain. It was as if the town had exhaled. Had seen, through Jenny's example, that compassion didn't have to be grand, that it wasn't weakness to care, but a kind of strength, one that spread. One morning, Jenny passed the local gas station and noticed a woman paying for the pump next to hers, waving off the thanks with the simple, "Someone once helped me." That phrase started echoing all over town. Someone once helped me. As if Jenny's quiet legacy had become a communal memory. Even the Facebook group, once a platform for mockery, transformed. Posts shifted from complaints and sarcasm to community drives, coat swaps, shared babysitting, carpool offers. Someone even created a pinned post titled, "What Would Jenny Do?" She laughed when Kathy showed it to her, but deep down, it humbled her in ways she couldn't explain. The diner kept serving, the booth stayed reserved, and Jenny kept pouring coffee and kindness in equal measure. But now, when she looked out the window, she didn't see the same town she'd walked through for years. She saw one that had woken up, one that had remembered how to look out for its own, not because someone told them to, but because a quiet waitress once decided that no one, especially a lonely boy, should sit in the cold without a warm plate and a place to belong. And somehow, that had been enough to start a revolution of the heart. It was early, just after sunrise, when Jenny found it. She'd arrived before the others, unlocking the diner as the town slowly stirred awake. The booths were still empty, the coffee machines just starting to hum, and the familiar scent of syrup and butter hadn't yet settled into the air. She moved through the space with practiced ease, wiping down menus, flipping chairs off tables, until she reached her station by the corner booth. There, resting neatly beside her order pad, was something small and metallic. A coin. Not spare change, not something dropped by a careless customer. It was heavy in her palm, cool to the touch, and unmistakably intentional. On one side was the emblem of the United States Army Special Forces, the same insignia Colonel Reeves had worn on his jacket. On the other, engraved with precision and simplicity, were just two Latin words, "Semper Memor," always remembering. Jenny turned it over slowly, her breath caught somewhere between wonder and disbelief. No note, no envelope, no explanation. She looked around the diner, empty. Outside, the street was still quiet, no unfamiliar cars, no figures lingering at the windows. Just the early light stretching across the sidewalk and the distant rumble of the school bus making its rounds. Whoever had left the coin had done so without fanfare, without needing to be seen, just like her. She slipped it into her apron pocket, feeling its weight settle there like a heartbeat. Steady, present. A silent thank you from someone who understood exactly what that booth had meant. What she had meant. Throughout the morning, she touched it without thinking. When she refilled mugs, when she rang up orders, when she passed the corner booth and remembered the way Adam had once sat there, small and silent, before the world knew his name. Kathy noticed the change in her. "You okay?" she asked, handing off a plate of hash browns. Jenny just nodded and smiled softly. "Yeah, I think I am." That night, back in her apartment, she placed the coin on her nightstand beside the framed letter from Adam and the worn journal her father once carried through deserts and war zones. It fit there perfectly, like it had always belonged. She didn't need to know who left it. The message was clear. What she had done, quietly, without expectation, had echoed far beyond the diner walls. And someone, somewhere, wanted her to know that kindness like hers wasn't forgotten. It was remembered. Always. The diner had settled into a gentle hum, the kind of rhythm Jenny had always found comfort in. Clinking forks, soft conversation, the hiss of bacon on the grill. It wasn't a slow morning, but it wasn't rushed either. Just the kind of steady that made the world feel manageable. Jenny moved between tables, pouring coffee, topping off syrup bottles, collecting empty plates with practiced grace. But her mind wandered, drifting not to the tasks, but to the quiet moments that had shaped the months before. Adam hadn't said much. He never told her his story, never explained the fear in his eyes or the silence he wore like armor. And she had never asked, not his last name, not where he lived, not why he was alone. She remembered the first time she saw him watching the other customers eat, his hunger held back by pride and a too big book he pretended to read. She remembered the way his shoulders dropped, just a little, when she left that first plate on the table. No questions, no pity, just food. Jenny had known then, without needing to know anything else, that the best kind of kindness was the kind that didn't demand explanations. People often thought helping meant solving, fixing, understanding every detail before offering a hand. But what Adam had needed, and what she had once needed herself, was something simpler. To be seen, to be cared for, to not have to justify the need. So she hadn't asked. And now, even after everything, the letter, the visit, the coin left on her station like a sacred thank you, she found herself thinking less about the headlines and more about that choice. That moment she decided his hunger was enough reason, that the quiet in his voice didn't need to be filled with interrogation, remembering without asking. It wasn't just a way of treating a lonely boy. It had become her way of moving through the world. A mother with tired eyes came in that morning, her toddler clinging to her leg. Jenny brought them a plate of scrambled eggs before the woman could ask. Later, a teenager sat alone near the window, no wallet in sight. Jenny gave him coffee and toast with a soft, "No charge today, sweetheart," and walked away before he could respond. These weren't acts of charity. They were acts of recognition, because questions sometimes close doors, but quiet compassion that opened them. As she refilled a glass of orange juice, Jenny caught her reflection in the window, apron dusted with flour, hair pulled back, the challenge coin still resting in her pocket like a secret strength. She didn't need to ask herself why she did it. She remembered, and that was enough. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rooftops as Jenny stepped out of the diner, the sky painted in soft strokes of lavender and gold. The door closed behind her with its usual gentle chime, and for once, she let herself linger on the sidewalk, breathing in the crisp evening air. The day had been long, like most days, but not heavy, not anymore. She slipped her hands into her apron pockets as she walked, her fingers curling around the familiar weight of the challenge coin. It was still cool against her skin, though she'd carried it all day. A quiet reminder tucked close, solid, steady, and real. The town was winding down. Porch lights flickered on, kids' laughter echoed faintly down a side street, and someone across the road was watering their garden, waving when they spotted her. Jenny smiled back, not out of habit, but warmth. Things had changed. Not just the diner, not just the people. Her. The world had seen what she did, sure. The stories had been shared, the pictures, the letters, the salutes. But none of it had been for recognition. She hadn't fed Adam for praise or thanks. She'd done it because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be hungry, and to need someone, just one person, to care without making you explain why. She passed the pharmacy where she lived above, its lights glowing soft in the window. The old steps creaked beneath her boots, but even that sound felt gentler now, as if the world had taken on a quieter rhythm since Adam. At her door she paused, the coin still in her hand. She held it up, watching the way it caught the last of the light, the engraving catching her eye once more. Semper Memor. Always remembering. Jenny tucked it carefully onto her nightstand beside Adam's letter and her father's journal. Then she stood by the window for a while, watching the town settle in for the night. Tomorrow would come with its usual work, orders, dishes, refills, and smiles. But it would come with something more, too. The certainty that kindness, even the kind that seems small or unseen, leaves a mark. She hadn't changed the world, but she had changed his. And maybe that was enough. Jenny Millers, the quiet waitress with a full heart and a plate of pancakes, turned off the light and closed her eyes, knowing at last that what she gave had mattered. Not to everyone, just to someone. And that was everything.